Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cracking Addiction. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and once again, we have with us Dr. Laura Petracek. Hello, Laura. How are you?
Hi, Fergal. I'm great. How about yourself?
Pretty good, pretty good. It's great to be here again. So, DBT, Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. I was always taught that there are four components to dialectical behavioral therapy. So there's distress tolerance management, there's distress management, there's interpersonal effectiveness, mindfulness, and emotional regulation, right? And I can get that, right? I understand that's what you teach when you're teaching DBT. What I have had difficulty with and continue to have difficulty with is the idea of the dialectical bit of DBT because I don't see where the dialectics fit in. So I got my opening question to you is, first of all, what is a dialectic? And then the second question will be, where does dialectic fit into that construct of DBT?
Okay. So dialectic means both and. So, for example, I'm struggling, I feel stuck, but I could change. It's kind of this thin line, thin tightrope between both, but holding both nonetheless.
Hmm.
Another one is I'm, let's say I'm very tired. Let's say you're swimming. I'm really tired, but I'm going to make it. I could make it to the shore. So
Hmm.
it's instead of either or, it's both and.
All right.
Okay. And and then how it's used in, trying to fix that there, how to use it in DBT, or how Linehan teaches it, is working with different emotional states. And instead of, like, a lot of folks in distress are either or, like, I'm always going to be this way, or I'm never going to get better. And she would then bring in the dialectic. I am a lot of psychological pain, and this too shall pass. So she tries to kind of balance out the statements of always or never or only, and have the client embrace both as being true, which both are true. Because the other statements, I'm never going to get better, or it's always going to be this way, that causes suffering. That causes distress.
Hmm.
Whereas holding both psychological mindsets helps reduce the stress, helps reduce the emotional vulnerability.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So that's what a dialectic is. And that's the benefit of understanding what a dialectic is, right?
Right.
But where does it fit into that four frame model of what DBT is? Oh, by the way, you like mnemonics. This is how I memorize the four models of DBT, or the four components of DBT, which is a dime. You have a unit of currency called a dime, don't you?
Yes.
So D for distress, I for
Right.
interpersonal, M for mindfulness, and E for emotional regulation.
I like that.
That's how I memorize it.
That's a good one.
You can use that again,
Okay.
Maybe it'll work out that every episode we do together, Laura, I'm going to give you a mnemonic. Who knows?
You could come out with your book, Mnemonics for DBT,
Mnemonics of the
because
day
there
for
is so much
DBT.
material to memorize. There is a lot. So,
There is a lot to memorize. So that's how I get through it.
mhm.
Yeah. So, okay. So those are the four components of DBT. But where does dialectic fit in there? Because the D for distress tolerance does not mean D for dialectics, or is it basically our dialectics one stream and the dime bar or the dime is another stream of DBT? What do you think?
Well,
What do you say?
okay. So the dialectics are like a thread throughout DBT,
Mm.
dialectical behavioral therapy. So the dialectics are used, there's probably about 200 worksheets in Marsha Linehan's DBT workbook.
Mm-hmm.
And woven throughout the worksheets are different examples of using dialectics, but it's not, the dialectics are sometimes in distress tolerance or interpersonal relationships or mindfulness or emotional regulation. So she does have some examples in each of the four modules.
Right,
And
right.
like, for example, in the interpersonal, you know, I'm really angry and upset with my partner right now. I want to get a divorce. However, I love them and I really don't want to leave. So, a way to hold both. You could feel like you want to leave, you could feel like you want to get a divorce, but how to not just react, that's it, I'm getting divorced.
Mm.
So, like with some couples, I'll just put on the table uh, it or actually tell them this is not allowed on the table. I want a divorce. So they, can't throw that ace on the table. So right here, you're coming here because you want to work it out. Then that's off the table because it can be used in so many manipulative ways. So that's what I have started doing with couples. And actually, it's worked better because it's closed that back door, or takes their foot out of the door, so to speak. It's like you're either 100% here or you're not here. So
Yeah,
let's, you know, but
yeah.
so that's one way to use it in interpersonal relationships is, I'm
Mm.
miserable in this marriage and I love him and I don't want to leave. So what do I do, Dr. P?
So that's a both and, yeah,
Yeah.
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 Or on the one hand, X, but on the other, Y.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes.
So one of the dialectics that I was taught was this idea of inhibited grieving versus unrelenting crisis. And that was to me, that was presented to me in my teaching, in my being taught DBT. And I could never really understand what that really meant. It was one of those great theories that it was really, for me, it was difficult to put into practice. Is that something that you're familiar with? And if so, how do you put that into practice?
That concept is not familiar to me.
Hmm.
Yeah, I have
Right.
not heard that. No.
All
What,
right.
unrelenting grieving?
Unrelenting, unrelenting crisis versus inhibited grieving as a dialectic. Another one would be another one that I was taught was active passivity versus active coping.
Ah,
Active passivity, versus, coping well. Does
yeah,
that,
I like that too. I like that. I actually
yeah,
haven't heard of that before either, but that one, um, I understand, and I could see that dialectic being very helpful. Like you could
hard.
be actively
Let's
passive, but
expand on that.
yeah, but being actively active, being assertive, taking action. Yeah, instead of just sitting there.
Another one would
That
be vulnerability, vulnerability versus aggression.
yeah,
Yeah, because you
that's
can be vulnerable and aggressive at the same time, can't you?
yes, you can.
Hmm.
And but sometimes I find they're part of a spectrum,
Hmm.
meaning once I work with a client to kind of reduce the aggression, usually the vulnerability will emerge and the sadness or hurt. And the aggression is more like a defense over the vulnerable feelings of hurt or sadness. That's how I usually work with those two.
So that then brings me to think about the idea of secondary emotions and the difference between primary and secondary emotions, whereby, if an event happens and you feel shame or pain, and rather than expressing shame or pain, you then express the second emotion that comes to you, which is anger, and then you become aggressive. So people respond aggressively to situations where there's judgment rather than demonstrating their true emotions, and that is that is always going to end up with unnecessary suffering. Or what would you say to that?
Mm. I think that's a good point. Meaning feeling the anger instead
Mm.
of allowing that vulnerability, allowing yourself to be vulnerable to feel the shame is unnecessary
Yeah.
suffering. However, for I think most clients, um, they've suffered so much in terms of being hurt
Mm.
emotionally that the unnecessary suffering is to be hurt yet again. And so it's quote worth it to them to have that facade of anger or experience or express that first as a way to protect themselves. Like
Mm.
how does that client know they or person know they can be safe expressing their shame as opposed to anger? Especially when they're in beginnings of working with a therapist, probably they're not going to express their vulnerability first. And the same with other people. So, like in a relationship, even though they're, in a partnership or married to each other, a lot of time, I mean, the saying goes, we marry our mother or father. So they're reacting to that person as someone from the past. Okay, this person doesn't want to hurt you. They're not hurting you.
Mm.
So we kind of work through some family of origin stuff.
Mm.
And I want you to see her or him for who they are, not for what you're projecting. That will
Yeah.
help lessen the unnecessary suffering.
Yeah. So if we take a step back to consider what DBT is, what you've said to me is that there's this concept of dialectics where there's both and either or. It's not an either or, it's both and.
Yes.
And so there are apparent contradictions in our life and our behavior. And dialectical behavioral therapy celebrates those contradictions and also teaches us four key skills, which is, the DIME, so distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, mindfulness, and emotional regulation. Now, without going into each of those in any great detail, I suppose we really need to understand why is it so good? Because a therapy only lasts or survives in the great psychological ecosystem if it serves a benefit.
Hmm.
So why has it survived thus far? What's it used for?
Well, originally, it was researched and used for primarily women who were diagnosed with borderline personality disorder.
Hmm.
Um, Up until that point, before DBT was discovered or put together as a psychotherapy discipline, they had used cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness alone, but they
Mm.
found that wasn't enough in terms of research. Women were still hurting themselves, a lot of emotional dysregulation, even with CBT and mindfulness. So the dialectic introduction helped them hold both, and
Mm.
especially integrating them. It's a three-pronged therapy. And I think in terms of a life cycle of a therapy discipline, um, I think DBT is actually expanding. I mean, so for
Mm.
example, I'm expanding it. I'm using it. My book uses it with people who have alcohol and substance use issues. It seems like every other day I see DBT being applied to another, um, DSM-5, another type of uh, what's it diagnosis.
Mm.
So maybe I've seen it used for eating disorders. I've seen
Mm.
it used for gambling issues, gambling addiction. I've seen DBT applied to working with couples, um, also applied to working with adolescents. So it's really branching out, whereas
Mm.
some um, it's expanding. The use is like, wow, it works good for this and it works good for that. And so I do see a long life cycle with DBT, and also because it's 3 different therapies in one, whereas some therapies that are just single or singly focused maybe don't necessarily last as long. But then sometimes I think therapies are renamed or rebranded. So, for example, let me see, it was probably, I don't know. I'm going to be I'm doing a training in New York City and Philadelphia next week. And in New York City, I went through the Gestalt Associate for Psychotherapy training. And now I've seen it rebranded into somatic counseling. And when that first came out, I said, that's Gestalt therapy.
Yeah.
Or, the way they're using Gestalt with, Gestalt is also taught in how to work with couples. And now they have, I think it's something, internal family systems. I thought when I first read the training, I'm like, that's Gestalt therapy. So that's another problem. As I see it, rebranding different therapies into a new and improved, and mainly to make money. They have these levels, like it's 1,000 for level 1, 2,000 for level 2. Insane. I wasn't trained that way, but going back, I digress.
So going back, just to let me ask you, what are the 3 pillars of DBT? Because you said that twice so far.
It's the dialectics, cognitive behavioral therapy, and mindfulness. Those are the 3 prongs of DBT.
Right.
Yeah, those are the 3.
So cognitive behavioral, cognition, dialectics, and mindfulness. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So we've run out of time again, Laura.
Okay.
I really hope that you can join us again. And
Most definitely.
Thank you for your time and wisdom today.
Oh, thank you, Fergal. I really appreciate your offer to have me here.
So that's all for today, folks. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.